Okay. Hello and welcome everyone. Patrik heter jag, ordförande i Svenska NLP-föreningen. Det här blir kort på svenska, sen kommer jag gå över till engelska här då. Graham, vår gäst här är från England. Om det är något ord på engelskan eller någonting sånt där som du undrar över och sånt där, skriv det bara i chatten så hjälper vi andra till att översätta det. Och är det någonting annat så några frågor och sånt där så är det också alltid välkommen att ställa dem. Antingen räcka upp handen eller ställa dem i chatten och så vidare. Okay. Very much welcome to our British guest, Graham Old. He is a very famous hypnotist and a very what's the word? He has written very many books, and I just checked before this webinar, and the first book I read by him was back in 2015, and I think I have almost 20 of your books. I'm not sure how many you have written, but I think I got pretty much all of your hypnosis books at least.
Wow.
I know you have written a couple of fiction books as well. I think I got one of those, but I haven't read it yet, so sorry. And Graham was also sort of famous, at least for me. He created a website called How to Do Inductions, which was sort of, when I got into hypnosis, I think it's very common to at least initially focus on the inductions. And that was like the golden, there you had all the various inductions and you could sort of practice and read about them and so on. And since then I sort of met Graham on Facebook, and we have chatted on and off over the years. And I learned more about him, and I found him as a very, very warm and friendly and nice and knowledgeable person. And when we talked about who do we want to have as a guest trainer for our large event for fall, Graham was one of the first names which popped up in my mind, because I was thinking he's such an awesome person, how to work with yourself, which I think would be very, very great for our members. So this will sort of be an introduction of Graham and what the event in November will be about. It's the first weekend of November, and we will give out all the links and everything like that. Well, I'm not sure what else to say. Yeah, well, Graham, he's also a memory master. He has written a fantastic book on how to, I don't know if you have a deck of cards with you, but he can do some amazing tricks. Maybe we will test him in November. Yeah. Okay, with that, thank you so much for joining us, Graham. It's great to see you, and
it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Shall I just jump straight in?
Go ahead.
So I'm very passionate about what I'm going to be talking about. So if I'm going too quickly or I'm missing questions, then just feel free to interrupt me. Milton Erickson once, and I should also say I've got my webcam up here. I've got some notes with quotes on here. I've got my phone here for the screen to see you guys. So if I'm looking all over the place, it's not some sort of covert induction. It's just I'm trying to keep track of everything. So Milton Erickson once said, if a person wants to change the course of the river, yet opposes a river by trying to block it, the river will merely go over him and around him. But if he accepts the force of the river and diverts it in a new direction, the force of the river will cut a new channel. And that's really the theme of what I'm talking about tonight and what we'll be talking about in November. The idea that by not resisting something, by accepting it, we can almost paradoxically thereby create change. So, I mean, by show of hands, does everyone here know who Milton Erickson is? Yeah. Okay. I didn't want to assume knowledge, or I didn't want to assume that I knew what you know. That's for all I know, you don't know what you know. So maybe we're all going to learn something here today, because this is going to be a collaborative talk, hopefully. I'm not the expert here. I'm not even the expert on the things I write about or what I'll be talking about. So this is collaborative. And one of the metaphors they use in acceptance and commitment therapy is of going up a mountain. And some people can act as if a trainer is the guide further up the path than you, and he's leading you to keep you safe. But it's more like we're on two separate mountains. I'm not at the top of my mountain. I'm on my mountain. You're on your mountain. And because I'm one step removed, I might be able to see obstacles in front of you you can't see yourself. So I'm not the expert. I'm not further traveled than you. I'm just from a different perspective. And likewise, you'll be able to see things that I can't see. So one of the things I would really appreciate this evening is questions, observations, comments. But because I'm not the expert, be aware that I may throw the question back to you. So if you say to me, how does this work in that situation? My natural initial response is always to say, well, what do you think? I'm sure it can get annoying, but it's just a habit now. I thought I'd start by letting you know how I discovered Milton Erickson. Well, firstly, Erickson has been a major influence on social care and even business organizations through approaches like appreciative inquiry. But just within the psychotherapy world, he influenced brief therapy, strategic family therapy, family systems therapy, human givens, ordeal therapy, narrative therapy, obviously NLP, therapeutic hypnosis, and solution-focused therapy. So I first encountered Erickson because I was working in children's social care. And after a while, predictably, I ended up in my doctor's office being treated for depression and stress, like is unfortunately very common in that sort of career. And I was referred by my doctor for counselling. And part of that counselling involved some pretty basic relaxation exercises. And I mean, really basic. I remember the counsellor said to me, what do you do to relax? And I said, well, nothing. I don't relax. And I think she thought I was trying to be clever or make something big of myself. But I'm autistic and my mind tends to go 10 to the dozen. And I like very much to get deep into subjects, and that's just how my brain works. And at that point in my life, I don't think I'd pause to think about relaxing. And so she said again, she tried it from a different angle. She said, okay, so when you do find yourself naturally relaxing, how do you get there? What brings it about? And I said, I don't even know what relaxation is. And she was very frustrated, but she did this little basic relaxation exercise and I was blown away. You could say that changed my life, because from that, I started looking into relaxation, meditation more. I started looking into related modalities and eventually discovered hypnosis. At the same time, my brother, who also worked in children's social care, but about 250 miles away, part of his role included supervising practitioners who are using solution-focused therapy with families. So he read further and further into the subject, look into the history of solution-focused therapy, and at the same time, I'm reading further into hypnosis and the history and application of therapeutic hypnosis. And there was this one day when almost at the same time we sent an email to each other. I think his arrived whilst I was typing mine, and we were both saying, have you heard of this guy called Milton Erickson? Because he's at the root of modern therapeutic hypnosis, and he's also at the root of solution-focused therapy and so many other approaches. I once heard a self-confessed Ericksonian hypnotherapist complain that solution-focused therapy never correctly acknowledges the influence of Milton Erickson. I struggled to keep a straight face because, and I'm going to refer to my notes here because I want to get the quotes exact in a moment. Steve DeShazer, who was one of the developers of solution-focused therapy, his first papers from like 1974 to 1978 were almost exclusively concerned with understanding how Erickson worked. I don't know how that fits in NLP time-wise. I don't know if is that before Bandler and Grinder or after? Does anyone know?
But they started about 72.
Okay, so
and it was sort of became a full function in NLP in like 75, 76, I think.
Okay, so they may have overlapped then. That's interesting. Yeah, so Steve DeShazer's first 4 or 5 papers were literally exclusively concerned with working out how Erickson did what he did and got the results he got. And there's this lovely moment, I think it's 1979, when Steve DeShazer gets to see Ericsson in action on a videotape, because prior to that, it had all just been writing. And DeShazer sees what Ericsson's doing, and bear in mind, he's written papers explaining how Ericsson does therapy. And he sees the man in action and he says, gee, he's doing it all wrong, which I take to be an admission that DeShazer had misunderstood how Ericsson did what he did. But one of the most significant ways Ericsson influenced solution-focused therapy, and one of the ways most cited by DeShazer, was in the creation of the miracle question. I'm going to spend some time looking at that and unpacking it and applying it. I'm going to look at the roots of it first. But before I carry on, when I say miracle question, do people generally know what I'm talking about? Some do, some don't. Okay, well, I'm going to unpack it, and in a moment, I'll give the kind of official question people use. But before we get to that, I want to give some background and talk about how it was created. So the story is, Insoo Kim Berg and her partner, Steve DeShazer, had started a brief family therapy center in Milwaukee. And Kim Berg was working with a client who, in desperation, this client said, maybe only a miracle will help. And Berg says, okay, imagine a miracle did happen, and carried on from that. And that's the root, or the formulation, or the beginning of the formulation of the miracle question. But the root goes back 24 years previous to that. In 1954, Ericsson wrote a paper entitled Pseudo-Orientation in Time as a Hypnotic Procedure. And 24 years later, DeShazer writes, Brief Hypnotherapy of Two Sexual Dysfunctions, the Crystal Ball Technique. And already I find that interesting. Ericsson's writing about a process, a procedure, all about pseudo-orientation in time, kind of traveling in time. But when DeShazer writes about it 24 years later, he's calling it a technique, which is very DeShazeran sort of thing to do. As you know, Ericsson was more free-flowing with how he would talk to people. He didn't look like he was using techniques, but DeShazer narrows it down to this crystal ball technique. And as him and his team continued working with pseudo-orientation in time, they discovered that, I'm going to quote here because this is important, simply describing in detail a future in which the problem is already solved helps to build the expectation that the problem will be solved. And then this expectation, once fully formed, can help the client think and behave in ways that will lead to fulfilling the expectation. Do you need me to read that again? No? Okay. So the idea is you describe the future in such depth that it builds expectation. That expectation then helps you think and behave in ways to actually fulfill the expectation. So it's encouraging possibility thinking and hope, and the realization that the problem is never insurmountable, it's never permanent, it's never unchanging. And back then, this early solution-focused therapy, they were using this in trance. So, I mean, the idea of trance may be outdated or not, but I don't think it's difficult to see. Some people you work with, and sometimes even with ourselves, we're in this kind of problem trance. And if someone says, what can you do to change that? We're like, nothing. Okay, well, who can you get to help? No one would help. Okay, what would happen if you asked your husband? He wouldn't do it. And you just can't get beyond that. And interestingly, there's some research going back to the 50s, but still being updated nowadays, that says when we focus on negative energies, negative emotions, particularly high arousal ones, it narrows our focus. It's literally almost talking like in a trance sort of way. So people do sometimes seem to be almost in a problem trance. And just trying to talk to them about how you get from here and make progress and move forward and change can just feel impossible because they're just stuck and their focus is too narrow. So what DeShazer discovered, or what he learned from Ericsson, was if you go to the end of the story and if you say, okay, I can't move you from there to here, but if you just jump here, how did you get there? And it kind of works backwards. So DeShazer used Ericsson's crystal ball technique in the mid to late 70s. His version involved having a client in trance, hallucinating several different crystal balls, and to describe what they were seeing. Two of the balls were about memories of the past that we'd use for resources, and two of the balls were about the future, orienting to the future. And DeShazer says, again to quote him directly, The crystal ball technique is used to project the client into a future that is successful. I have found that simply having the client, whilst in trance, view his or her future in a crystal ball can be enough to prompt different behavior, thereby leading to a solution. So it's like the expectation of change itself can be the thing that makes that change happen. Because if you're sat here and you're hopeless and you're thinking, I'm never going to be able to get on that plane, I always freak out. We're going to have an argument tonight, we always argue. And any other issue you've got, if we're focused on that, it can be so difficult to make progress because that's our narrow focus. That's the trance we're locked into. And sometimes if you say to someone like that, well, just try and, imagine some of the possibilities, have a bit of hope. It can be really difficult to break through that. So what the crystal ball technique does, and the miracle question will come to in a minute, it kind of takes you out of that situation and goes, okay, well, pretend you're not there. Let's just imagine for a moment, you're over here where that issue isn't happening. Now what's your life like? And people can begin throwing all sorts of ideas out there. It's like the creativity flows, and because of hope and the possibility thinking, they're no longer locked in. They're no longer in that problem trance. Their gaze has got bigger. And going back to the narrowing of your focus, if you're looking just at negative emotions, there's been some research recently into like loving kindness meditations that suggests when people focus on positive emotions, particularly high arousal ones, it actually improves, in research, improves their peripheral vision. Not just metaphorically, it literally has an effect on improving their metaphorical vision because they're not locked in as much as they were before. So De Shazer says you use the crystal ball technique to project the client into the future. I like to think of it differently. I like to think we use it to bring the future into the here and now, or we bring the future self into the here and now. So if I'm thinking about my problem and I just can't see a way to get beyond it, if I can get myself into a position where I'm saying, okay, if I was beyond it, what then? It's like the rules completely change. Any questions about the crystal ball thing? Because I know it's a kind of a weird technique to talk about. What's interesting is if you go back and read, or you get hold of Ericsson's collected papers, he talks about crystal balls a lot. I think they're not as common a cultural tool nowadays, I think. But he would use it for someone to look into their past and get hold of resources. He would even use it for someone to have to take a step back and look at themselves, from 2 steps or 1 step removed. And he'd use it obviously to look into the future. And you can be quite flexible with it because you could say, well, when you're looking at this issue in the past, and if you do it quickly or you word it correctly, that image they're seeing is blurred. Like, the image of a crystal ball has to take some time to become clear. So it's quite an interesting tool that Ericsson used quite a lot for all sorts of different reasons. He even used it as an induction tool. But over time, it was adjusted and became the miracle question. So miracle question.
A question.
Yeah.
Could you see this as a way to create hope?
Absolutely, yeah. I think for me, that's almost the primary tool. Because if someone sees no way out of their situation, either working with a client or themselves, that's a really fixed place to be in. If you're stuck in your situation, you just can't see any hope, any possibility of any change, it's really difficult to move yourself on from that. Really, really difficult. Whereas hope and the notion that just daring to believe for a second the future could be different, I just think opens doors, it opens neural pathways, it brings in possibility thinking. I think it's a massive part of hope. Yeah, hope's a powerful tool. And one of the ways I think the crystal ball technique would work in ways that other things wouldn't, apart from like the miracle question, is you have someone saying that can never happen, that's impossible. And you literally just say to them, okay, well, let's pretend it was possible. But it puts that in a frame where they can pretend that. You're almost like saying, let's play a game for a moment and pretend it's possible. And then hope is on the table again, which, yeah, I think is extremely powerful. And I think that's a massive part of it. So the kind of official form the miracle question took over time. I'll read it to you directly. I don't normally ask it like this, but this became the form that was taught in all sorts of trainings and books. I have a rather strange question to ask you. Suppose tonight that while you slept, a miracle occurred. And the miracle was that the problem that brought you here today is resolved, but you're asleep. So you don't know a miracle has happened. So when you wake up, what would be the first thing you'd notice that would tell you a miracle has taken place? That's the simple Steve DeShazer team's version of the miracle question. And I want to unpack that a little bit before we look at other ways of asking the question. And the first thing to notice, I think the build up to the question is really good. I'm going to ask you a question, or people might say, I'm going to ask you a rather strange question. I tend to ask the question differently, but I'll begin by saying, I wonder if you can humor me for a moment. Let's just let our imaginations run wild and let's see if this takes us in a different direction. And the thing about that sort of build up is that I'm making it implicit that I need my client or friend or everyone I'm talking to come along with me. I need them to consent to the rather strange process we're about to start and to engage with it. We've piqued their interest. And I guess when it comes to personal development, we need to do ways to do that. We need to find ways to do that to ourselves, to engage ourselves, because self-development and personal development can be a real slog. But if we can find a key in it that is of interest to us, that we're slightly curious about, I think we're engaged more. And now the next thing is the idea of the miracle needs to be discussed, because for some people it's a powerful and useful concept. It allows them to think beyond their usual limitations. They can hardly say that's impossible for my problem to be resolved, because that's the whole point of a miracle. It makes the impossible possible. But many people nowadays stumble over the idea. They find the idea of miracles ridiculous or childish, perhaps even offensive. So one of the things to make clear is that this is a construct. It's a frame. It's a language game where one of the rules is that the impossible is possible. Imagine if I said to you, okay, imagine you can fly. And you might think, what? Especially if you're locked in on negative emotions and you're struggling to make progress, you might think, I can't fly, what are you talking about? But if I knew one of your interests was the same as mine, and I said to you, okay, I want you to imagine that you're at cinema, you're watching the latest Marvel film. And I'd like you to see yourself float out of your body up to the movie screen, stepping into the movie and becoming a character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I'd like you to inhabit the body of one of the characters that can fly. Now, what we've done there is we've set a frame around this conversation where we both know that in the Marvel universe, people can fly. So all the time you accept the frame of that conversation, you can begin to think about, okay, if I flew, what would it be like? Where would I go? Who would I be? Because you've bought into the frame, you have little objection when I ask you to imagine that you can fly. So whether or not we talk about miracles, remember that we are inviting ourselves, inspiring people to consider that just for a moment, just in this short window in this conversation, the impossible is possible. And also, it seems significant to me that the miracle happens when the person is asleep. It's not something they consciously make happen. Through the ongoing conversation, and we see how behavior changes, things are made different. But if someone's feeling overwhelmed by a problem, and I say to them, okay, what can you do to get out of this? You would have seen it maybe with yourselves, maybe with your children. There's just this, when there's a lack of hope, as we've talked about, and you're overwhelmed by the all-encompassing nature of this problem, you can't see anything you can do. You're just not in the right place to hear the question or to think about that. But if I can get you to jump to the end of a story and work backwards, it's much more easy. And also the fact they don't realize a miracle has happened because it happens in their sleep means when they wake up, they are looking with curiosity for signs of the miracle, which again is difficult to do when you're locked into your problem trance. But if I say to you, oh, did you not know last night a miracle happened? and you begin thinking, and you go back and look in your day, and you look at conversations you've had, and you go, oh, maybe that was part of that. Maybe that was that. It kind of, again, it piques your interest, and it draws you in just by playing this simple game of imagining a miracle has happened. Any questions about that? Okay, I can't see everyone, so if you put your hand up and want to say anything, just go ahead and say it, and feel free to interrupt me. Now, what I find really interesting and frustrating is that the miracle question was discovered as a result of utilization. A client said to Insoo Kim Berg that would take a miracle, and she went with it. But over time, it became a really, really fixed technique with specific words. In some of the early books, there's even pauses, like you must pause at this point, you must say that word like that. There's even an account of a time when a client said to Berg, I don't believe in miracles. And she replied, well, neither do I, but just imagine if one happened. So I find that frustrating. I think we've lost some of the utilization of using the client's language and the client's possible worldview to have this fixed question. But what's interesting is, even though Steve DeShaze's version of solution-focused therapy, called solution-focused brief therapy, is the most well-known, it's also the most formulaic, which made it easy to pass on and easy to teach. So that's why it's the most popular. But from the very beginning, there's been different versions of solution-focused therapy, not least of which is seen in the work of Bill O'Hanlon, that you may know of, is a hypnotherapist. He studied directly under Milton Erickson. And one of the questions he uses, and you'll be able to hear his hypnotic influence here, he says, not with children, but not just with children, if I pulled out a magic wand and I was able to perform magic on your situation, what will be happening that's different from before? And I want you to hear his language here and how his use of will, whilst he's talking about something in the future, makes it feel present tense. If I pulled out a magic wand and was able to perform magic on your situation, what will be happening that is different from before? So you can see there, he's trying to play around with words a little bit and sneak in some feelings and ideas. But you don't have to be clever and come out with alternatives. You can be very simple. You can say, if I met you in 6 months and this wasn't a problem anymore, how would I know? What would I notice? You could say, what would it look like if you're having a good day tomorrow? How could you tell it was a good day? You could even just say, and this is quite a useful one, because really all of this is about pacing and leading and not going too fast for the client, not going too far, but taking a few steps and taking them with you. So you could just say, how will you know when things are improving? And I guess the way that works with us, if we're using it for ourselves, is we often think about the future or the removal of the problem as just that. I don't want to be anxious. And now we think about getting on a plane and not being anxious, and we leave it as that. The miracle question or the miracle conversation that follows is really in-depth and engaged. So I don't just ask questions about, what do you want to happen? Because people will often say, I want this to not happen. So we reword it as a positive. If you don't want to be anxious, what do you want to be? I want to be calm, confident, at peace. Okay, and what would that look like? And you'll discuss it. And what we use here as well is, you might think of it as embedded commands. It can look quite NLP-y to people who are trained in NLP. But if I say to you, what's the first thing you notice in the morning? It tells you a miracle has happened. And you say, I wake up and I'm excited to see my children. And I feed back, you're excited to see your children. What else? I go down and I make breakfast for them and I don't resent it. You don't resent making breakfast for them. How does that feel? And you can see that I'm feeding back. I'm giving them a chance to correct if I've misunderstood, but I'm using their words. There's also an embedded command in there, or an embedded suggestion. And it's also making it future tense. We're talking about making it present tense. We're talking about the future, but we really want them to be engaged with that as something that's happening now. You wake up and you don't feel resentful. So these questions you ask after the miracle question really allow you to unpack it. And it's one of the things we need to get used to doing ourselves when we're working on an issue, when we're working at something that needs change. Not just thinking about what needs to change, but what do we want things to be like once it's changed? because after you have a big miracle question conversation, some therapists even go on to say, okay, so the day after the miracle, when you wake up, because we're not talking just about the removal of the problem, we're talking about your life and what it looks like and how you want it to be and how you want to feel, and the positives worded as an intentionally what you want rather than what you don't want. And these are things we need to, I think, constantly train ourselves in. You know, we can learn about it at a conference, we can read it in a book. I think, yeah, that's right. I need to stop saying what I don't want. I need to start saying what I want. But it's so easy to slip back into that pattern. And me and some colleagues and me and some family members will often have, I guess, role play therapy sessions when we're not doing it so much to improve our skills as therapists or in using questions like this. We're doing it to really drill it into our brains, to think in a different way, to naturally think, okay, what do you actually want? Not what do you not want? I mean, I can do a demonstration of an alternative version of the miracle question if someone's up for having a little chat about that. Do you have any volunteers? Okay, well, I can describe to you how it would happen. And if someone wants to see it in action, just let me know and we can talk through it.
I'll go.
Sorry, I can't see who that is.
Marco.
Oh, hi. Hi, Marco.
Hi.
Good to meet you. So thanks for volunteering. What would you hope to get out of this little demonstration?
See how it works.
See how it works. Okay. And do you have an issue? Yeah, I mean, obviously, don't pick an issue that's massive and it's gonna, obviously going on YouTube. But something that you might just want to see some change in that's causing you some frustration. Did you have an issue in mind?
Could take some procrastination sometimes.
Okay, it's procrastination. So obviously there could be a language difficulty here. What do you mean by procrastination?
Putting stuff further away instead of jumping in and doing it.
Okay, so you'd rather be someone who jumps in and does it?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you to imagine something now that's going to sound a bit ridiculous. It's either fantastic and magical and really creative, or it's just a little bit silly and yeah, nonsense. But if you're happy to give that a go, we can go ahead and try something out. Okay, I'm going to ask you to imagine, sorry? I'm going to ask you to imagine you're sat somewhere comfortable, maybe in a big leather armchair or wherever you sit, where you just want to relax, have some time for yourself and just, just chill for a bit. And if I talk about imagining things, we're not necessarily talking about visualizing. Some people can visualize, some people aren't great at it. So just imagine, pretend, think about whatever works for you. And I want you to imagine, and you can do this with eyes closed or eyes open, whatever's easiest. If you do close your eyes, we can keep talking and keep the conversation going. I want you to imagine that I'm handing you a photo album. A big, I picture like big red leather photo albums. I don't know what you think of. And this is a magic photo album. And you're going to see why in a moment. Because the first magic thing about this album is when you open it, it falls exactly to the point where you are in your life now. And there's a photo of you sat in this chair, thinking about just wanting to get things done. If you flicked back a few pages, you'd see some photos from the past, situations maybe where you procrastinated, where you've been frustrated about that. If you flick forward, you'll see the beginning of change and what that would look like. But the second magical thing about this photo album is if you just flick forward, say 6 pages, whatever number you might choose, you'll land at a photo of a time and a place where this procrastination doesn't have the hold on you that it does now, where you just get on with things. And you can see in that photo what that looks like when you're that person. And the third magical thing about this album is that you can now step into that photo, into that person, in that scene, and try that on and see what that feels like to be you without the procrastination, to be the you who just jumps at things and gets on with it. And what's interesting to me is you're taking my word that this is a magic photo album. So I'm wondering, Marco, what would be the first thing in that photo, in that scene that you're in now, that would make you think, hey, maybe this has worked. Maybe this album is magical.
I'd say the smile on my face.
The smile on your face. And what does that feel like?
Good.
It feels good. Who would be the first person who'd notice the smile on your face?
Like,
Would it be anyone around you, any friends or family members who'd think, just a minute,
yeah.
something's happened to Marco? And would they know just from the smile on your face that you'll know someone gets on with things, or would they wonder what else was going on?
They would probably wonder what's going on.
So what next? You'd notice a smile on your face. As you carry on throughout your day, what other things would tell you, hey, I think this has actually happened. I think this photo album's magic. What's the next thing you'd notice?
Not having a list of stuff to do.
You've got a list of stuff to do.
Yeah.
And is that a list of things that you are passionate about doing, or just things that need to be done?
Both.
Both.
Yeah.
So you've got a smile on your face. People have noticed a smile on your face. You've got these lists of things to be done. So what does that feel like? Because I know some people, you get a list of jobs and it's like, oh, but that you there with a smile on your face, when you have these lists, what does that feel like?
I'd say I'd be friendly with my list, and it wouldn't scare me. It wouldn't bother me.
Yeah. It doesn't scare you. Okay.
No.
What does that feel like to not be scared by the list of things you have to do? Comfortable. And if I was there in that photo with you, would I be able to tell from looking at you that you were comfortable?
Yeah, I think the smile and my posture and the whole thing would show that, there would be a peaceful feeling emanating from you.
So your posture's changed as well, and you're feeling peaceful.
Yeah.
And so what happens for next day? So you spent a day like that, you're smiling, you're comfortable, your posture's different, people are noticing it, you've got these lists. As you carry on from that point, what's the next day like?
I'd say it would become normal. It would be in a normal state. I wouldn't be, and people might react, but they would see a stable, happy face and different posture and the whole thing. So I think that would be quick.
It'd be quick.
Yeah.
So it's normal for you to then be comfortable and to have this smiling face.
Yeah.
And it's so pervasive that people are noticing that they can't deny that something's different.
They would notice in the beginning, but afterwards that it would fade because it would go pretty quickly. I think it's like taking a state and bringing it down to a normal level, a more rare moment.
Yeah.
And make it normal. So I think there wouldn't be that's the way I imagine it and I see it. It's
interesting, isn't it? We're talking about something magical, but part of your brain is already going, this is normal. This was just happening. What I'm really curious about, and you can jump out of that photo now and back into the chair with the photo album on your lap. Are there times in your life already where you see some of that normal, calm, friendly with the lists?
Yeah.
You do see that sometimes.
Yeah. It's not a new state. It's not a new thing. I just want it to be more, the normal state.
normal.
Yeah.
So what's interesting, as you've closed that album, and you often find with photo albums that the photos begin to fade over time, and those photos in the past that you don't look at much anymore may begin to fade. The ones you revisit a lot because they're cherished memories, or you learn lessons from them, maybe they keep their color. But the other photos maybe over time fade, maybe not. And I'm wondering, if when you flick forward to the photo you chose to jump into, it'll be interesting to discover what clues your subconscious mind picked up on. You may not even be aware of it consciously, but you've flicked past a number of photos on your way to getting to that point of the magical normal. And it's not for us to unpack here, but it would be interesting to almost walk backwards from that and go, oh, I vaguely remember seeing a photo where I did this, or there was a photo where I did that. Yeah, all pretty magical, but all thoroughly normal as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
If anyone's got any questions about that, or if Marco's got any feedback, feel free to just throw it up. What you might have noticed, and this is a sign of how engaged people get in the conversation, is Marco a number of times didn't answer instantly straight away. You know, if you'd said to someone, what would your future be like when this problem wasn't affecting you? And they had an answer straight away. Sometimes you want to dig a little bit deeper. You want them to really think about it. So one of the best answers you can get, and therapists find it frustrating, we probably find it frustrating when it's just ourselves, is, I don't know. You know, I'm saying, what is it like? You jump into a photo, you no longer procrastinate. What does that feel like? It'd be natural to say, I don't know. Also, because people are used to talking about their problems. They're coming prepared to talk about their problem, and then you kind of whip that out from under their feet and you talk about the absence of the problem or the presence of a solution, and they have to really take some time to get their head around that. So often, and I don't know, just means give me some time to sit with this. And the key would be not rushing it. Some therapists have long lists of things you can say in response to the I don't know. I'm happy just sitting there and waiting. Yeah, because we don't always know. And I'd rather someone took the time to think about it so they can get really engaged in the story, to have to really imagine that magical photo album. I prefer that than a quick answer or quick solution. Yeah, so that's the magic photo album.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
It's Marco again. The fact that I went so quick, for me, was obvious because I have an image of that and I have a feeling of that. Maybe if I would have taken a problem where I haven't had the solution, I would probably have stumbled more to get into it the way you said. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think,
yeah,
obviously you've thought about this some before, but there could be times if you were talking to someone who's really locked in on their problem, just to have to spend some minutes and thinking about life differently without the problem is a completely new experience, and they wouldn't know what it would look like. Yeah, so I think that's the way you proceeded with it was just perfect. Many of the therapists in the team that developed solution-focused therapy or solution-focused brief therapy had a Buddhist view of change. That change is constant, stability is an illusion. And that being the case, I want to share with you 3 quotes from Erickson, the inspiration behind it all, before we move on to look at acceptance, because there's some Buddhist roots to some of that. So these quotes from Erickson that I love. And if you know of these, or you want to share any of your own quotes, feel free to say. The first quote: life will bring you pain all by itself. Could be the first noble truth of Buddhism. Life is suffering. Life will bring you pain all by itself. Your responsibility is to create joy. My second favorite quote from Erickson. Again, you can see the influence on solution-focused therapy here. People do not come into therapy to change their past, but their future. And that one can be difficult because just because of our cultural conditioning of therapy and change work, we might think what we want to do is change our past. But what we really want to do is change our current attachment to that past and give ourselves a more hopeful future. The final quote, which really leads us into the next section from Erickson: change will lead to insight far more often than insight will lead to change. I'm guessing some of these are already familiar to you guys from NLP literature and things like that. So let's change direction a bit here. Let's flow with the river and let's go from 1950s and 1970s America to 1920s Japan, where we see further therapy influenced by Buddhism, particularly Zen Buddhism, in the work of Dr. Shoma Morita, who developed something he called experiential therapy and his followers called it Morita therapy. Anyone here heard of Morita therapy? Okay, cool. I get excited talking about this, so just interrupt me if I waffle on. So Morita therapy is an experiential therapy. It was initially designed for treating what we might call anxiety-based neuroses. At the time, it was like a Japanese culturally bound condition, which included anxiety, perfectionism, hypochondria, all these sort of things, massive introspection. And it was a four-stage residential program, and quite a structured one at that. Because Morita found, and I think this is solid, Morita found that when patients tried to get rid of their symptoms of anxiety by talking about their anxiety, those symptoms stayed within their focus. Remember me saying that if we focus on our negative emotions, particularly highly charged ones, it narrows our focus completely. So we're saying to an anxious person, get past your anxiety, think about something other than anxiety, and we're continually talking about anxiety again and again and again, so they're narrowed in on it completely, almost like they're in a trance. Morita likens this to a donkey tied to a post, where the donkey keeps walking around the post to free itself, only to become more immobilized and more attached. And I can relate to this because my wife and I recently got a new puppy, which is all great and fun and messy. But one of the things it does at the moment is it's just so excited about every smell and every sight it sees that if we take it for a walk, it cannot walk in a straight line. It's going off here and it's going off there. And very often it's going around my legs. And when it realizes it's going round and round the legs, it tries to get itself out, either by going under the lead or going between my legs. And it's like something from a ridiculous comedy that you'd say that doesn't happen in real life, but it happens almost every day, which my wife finds hilarious. And it also just happens because the dog is using the same tool to get out of the problem that got it into it in the first place. So Morita would say to his therapist he was training, not to focus on a client's symptoms because they're already obsessed with the symptoms. Focus on their ability to live a purposeful life. And we can think about so many conditions that are like this. Blushing, apart from maybe the initial first couple of times, people blush because they think they're going to blush. Stage fright, someone gets nervous about giving a speech and it going badly, and they get really anxious and their breathing gets a little bit out of control, and they focus on the worst possible scenario, so they end up giving a bad speech and it carries on. Panic attacks, very often, almost always, panic attacks happen because we're panicking about having a panic attack. This focusing on the symptoms and the problem just narrows us in and locks us into that situation. And Morita therapy believes that all emotions, even unpleasant ones, are a natural part of the human experience, all of them. If they're left untampered with, these emotions can guide us to live a more authentic life while appreciating reality as it really is. There's an ebb and flow to these emotions. So if you also leave it alone for long enough, most emotions on their own will fade. But ultimately, the goal of Morita therapy was to provide patients with experiences that would enable them to let go of their private struggle with their emotions and instead focus on accepting themselves, accepting their symptoms and their reality as it is. And that all may sound fairly normal if you think of it as happening in a therapy office somewhere in the West, but this actually happened in 4 stages, and it's fascinating how different it is to how anyone, I think, does therapy over here. These stages last between 4 and 7 days. So the first stage was isolation and rest, and patients are placed in a small room and told to stay in a resting position as much as possible, except when using the toilet or the bath. They're not allowed to speak to anyone. They're not allowed to undertake any activity that distracts them, like reading, listening to music, watching TV. The therapist enters the room once a day to observe them, but doesn't talk to them. He just checks they're safe. And someone goes in 3 times a day with meals. And the purpose of this stage is to let their mind wander as they think about their lives and their problems and their past or their future, whilst at the same time experiencing doubt and pain and anguish and anxiety. Doesn't sound like a lot of fun, does it? But I trust you can see the paradoxical nature of it, which is drawn from Marita's Zen Buddhist beliefs. Because usually by the 4th day, people are so bored and they want to become active. So in the next stage, we do some light repetitive work. It's going to be tidying, weeding the garden. I do some journaling. And they begin to notice, because they can go outside now, they're a slightly larger room. They begin to notice the birds, the weather, ants. And that desire for doing more is growing. Because, like, being in that room was awful. Doing some weeding is good, but oh, come on, I need more. So the 3rd stage is purposeful activities. That's increased activity, including gardening, cleaning, meal preparations. They can talk to other patients now, but not about their symptoms. There's art projects, continued journaling. And it's during this stage they begin to experience the joy that comes from achieving something and doing something. And then the 4th stage is social reintegration, when they might go out, do some errands, they might talk to other patients and help them with, I don't know, the pottery wheel or whatever it might be. And the whole purpose of this is not to eliminate symptoms or suffering, because such attempts are seen as counterproductive. There's no intervention at all specifically to reduce symptoms, because there's loftier goals: to have patients learn to accept the ebb and flow of thoughts and feelings and still take purposeful actions. So it's very different to how we tend to think of therapy in the West, isn't it? One person talking to another person about their problems, and also different to how we think about therapy, emotions, change, and behavior. Yeah, I can't help shaking the feeling that Marita and Ericsson overlap in some very significant ways. First of all, utilization. As we know, Ericsson, he just accepts everything that is presented to him. There's a story, you probably know the story, the woman with a gap in her teeth. And her parents have died. She's really depressed. She's a young woman. She's suicidal. And she says to Ericsson that basically he's got 3 months to sort her out, or she's going to take her own life. And Ericsson begins to, and she says the only benefit, the only positive in her life is there's a guy at work that she's got a crush on, and they go to the water fountain the same time every day, but she can't do anything about it because she's so ugly with the gap in her teeth. Over time, Ericsson gets her to agree to practice squirting water through her teeth. She thinks it's ridiculous, but she's got nothing else to lose. And then he challenges her, after a while, when she's got really good at this, to go to the water fountain at a time when she knows her colleague will be there, and to squirt water at him through her teeth, which she does. And according to the story, he runs after her and catches her, and it's all very romantic. And the next day, she goes back to the water fountain thinking, has it really made a difference? What's going to happen? And the guy jumps out of the water pistol and squirts her. And as legend has it, because this is an Ericsson case story, 3 months later, she writes to him to say they're engaged and they're getting married. And a year later, she's got a baby. What you make of that story, I don't know, but it just shows that Ericsson doesn't just utilize the positives. It doesn't just utilize obvious examples, like you can hear the clock ticking in the background that reminds you time carries on as normal. He utilizes the problem itself. This woman's feeling bad about herself and her looks, and he utilizes that as, he makes the problem part of the solution. there's another Ericsson story I want to tell you guys, if it's all right. I'm gonna, I want to get the quote right because some of Ericsson's words are unbelievable. So this woman in California writes to Ericsson to say her husband has had a stroke. He can't talk and he's completely paralyzed. And he now spends his time on a hospital bed being used as a lesson by doctors and nurses who point him out to the trainees and say, he'll be here till he dies. This man's useless. He's just waiting to die. The wife describes him as a Prussian German. This was not long after the end of World War II. I think early 50s. He's a very proud man. He's set up a business all by himself. He's an active man. He's quite a domineering man. And now he just has to lay there helpless. And Ericsson actually says in his case study, he thought that all he'd be able to do was give the woman some comfort. But the man is taken to see Ericsson. He sits down in front of him. And I'm actually going to change some of the words Ericsson uses because this was 1950s and he uses insults that we wouldn't use today. Excuse me. But Ericsson says to his man, paralyzed, unable to speak, so you're a Prussian German, the stupid goddamn Nazis. How incredibly stupid, conceited, ignorant, and animal-like Prussian Germans are. They thought they owned the world and they destroyed their own country. This is, he says, they're really not fit to live. The world would be better off if they were used for fertilizer. Quite harsh. And he continues, you've been lying around on charity, being fed, dressed, cared for, bathed, toenails clipped. Who are you to merit anything? You aren't even the equal of a, let's say, learning disabled criminal Jew. And then Ericsson continues and he says to the man, I haven't even had time to give you all the insults you deserve. So you're going to come back tomorrow to hear some more, aren't you? And the man explodes, no! So Ericsson says, look, for a year, you haven't talked. Now all I had to do was call you a dirty Nazi pig and you start talking. You need to come back here tomorrow and get the real description of yourself. And the man goes, no, 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 and staggers out of the office. I wanted to read those words exactly because they demonstrate that, one, that's not how you should do therapy. That wasn't very nice. But they also demonstrate that Ericsson took the man's ethnicity, he took his national history, he took world events, he took his problems, like he's laying in a hospital bed, not moving, not talking, being looked after, and he took his personality and he utilized it all. And utilization is just another example of acceptance. It's exactly what Marita's doing. He's using their boredom, he's using their frustration, he's using their inner focus. He's accepting it and thereby teaches them to accept life as it is. Other similarities between Ericsson and Marita therapy. Marita therapy makes use of koans from Zen Buddhism and metaphors. And we know that Ericsson does that a lot. In fact, Ericsson says this quote, and he discovered this recently. Sometimes, in fact, more times than is realized, therapy can be firmly established on a sound basis only by the utilization of silly, absurd, irrational, contradictory statements. Which is just sounds like a Japanese koan, doesn't it? What's the sound of one hand clapping? What was your face before you were born? This is exactly what Ericsson's talking about. Getting out of our heads, out of our own way and being comfortable with mystery, illogicality and psychological discomfort. Sometimes talking through a problem, talking through a change we want to make is too left-brained. We need to do something crazy, like think about jumping into a magic photo album. Think about miracles. Think about what it would be like if you could float off down the stream on the leaf. And this way of thinking is just opening up more possibilities, opening more channels, more options for us. Another thing they did, both Marita and Ericsson didn't pathologize people. They didn't see them as broken. They saw them as doing the best they could with what they had. They're both active and action-oriented. They're not about getting over your symptoms. They're about living your life. And they also both use, which goes back to Ericsson's thing about change would lead to insight far more often than insight leads to change. And then also there's the use of paradox of, some guy has got so in on himself he's not living his life, and Marita's solution is to stick him in a room to do nothing for 4 days. That's just paradoxical. Ericsson had people come to see him, a couple who couldn't consummate their marriage, and he told them they weren't even allowed to kiss. by prescribing the symptom, we make people want to get out of their situation spontaneously, which Marita and Ericsson both did. So decades apart, different cultural backgrounds, different parts of the world, really similar, I think, because of the focus on acceptance and utilization as the core. Any questions or observations on that? I know I'm rattling through this because I'm excited.
Yeah, I got a question concerning Marita. Is the goal to see all thoughts, feelings as neutral in the end?
The goal is what the Japanese called arugamama, I think that's how you pronounce it, which just means accepting life as it is. So recognize, so they didn't talk about bad emotions and negative emotions. They talk about unpleasant emotions and pleasant emotions, and accepting that that happens. Now, over time, you may learn to handle things better and be in a better place so those things don't knock you down as much. But if we were to live life thinking, right, I must never have any negative or unpleasant emotions, we're really setting ourselves up for a bad time. So yes, the goal is accept life as it is and get on and live it. It's almost, the goal is almost beyond the symptoms. The symptoms are coincidental. Yeah, the goal is to increase your passion for life so much you just get on and live it, regardless of negative or unpleasant emotions. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thanks.
So one of the things I'm excited about talking about in November is how a change-focused tool like solution-focused therapy, which we could use to inspire ourselves and to make some progress, can coexist with something like an acceptance-based therapy, like Marita therapy, which would seem more about just accepting what's happening and getting on with it. And for a long time, I grappled with that because I was very passionate about both modalities. I could see how they were useful to clients, but I could also see how they're useful to me, but they also seemed in complete contradiction. I think the key is something that I've come to call brief acceptance. Brian Ogawa, if that's how you pronounce it, Ogawa, a Japanese Marita therapist, said we must accept the absolutely unchangeable in order to change the absolutely unacceptable. We must accept the absolutely unchangeable in order to change the absolutely unacceptable. So if I said to you, you just got to accept whatever happens to you and get on with life, that can be a difficult pill to swallow. But if I said to you, sometimes you have to accept the things you can't change for now so that you can change those things that you just can't accept. That, I think, sits a bit more easily. I don't know what you think. So I call this brief acceptance. Because acceptance isn't passive resignation. It's not indifference, it's not surrender. It's not even approval. Acceptance is recognizing that if you don't want to drown in the quicksand, you need to stop struggling. Acceptance is the active choice to acknowledge and make room for unpleasant experiences, painful feelings, sensations, urges, emotions. We drop the struggle and we allow them to be as they are. And instead of fighting them, resisting them, bring all our energy into running from them, we let them be and we get on with life. We focus on our miracle scenario. We focus on our values. We focus on our goals. And acceptance is, in a very real sense, simply starting where you are. Notice Ogawa said, we must accept the absolute unchangeable in order to change the unacceptable. Not only do they coexist, not only do they coexist, they depend on each other. You need to accept something in order to change it. And Carl Rogers said, the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. Then I can change. Not the curious paradox is that when I accept myself, I might also be able to change, but it's not until I accept myself that I can change. The acceptance is the very thing that makes change possible. And Carl Jung said exactly the same point. We cannot change anything until we accept it. Yeah, so for me, the exciting thing is that these two modalities work together fantastically. Solution-focused therapy can help you realize where you want to go, can even help you experience it, and then using that can empower our acceptance. We can say, right, this isn't acceptable to me, I need to change this, or I need to learn to live with this so I can get there. Solution-focused therapy can help you see how things are right now, notice instances of the miracle. And acceptance-based therapies can help you learn to let go of the past. Acceptance-based therapies can teach us how to live in the here and now despite discomfort, to accept where we are as a precursor to our next step forward. So I find it really interesting to ask the miracle question in a slightly different way. I don't know, I can't remember the word I used when I did the magic photo album, but rather than saying in this scenario, the problem's gone or the problem's solved, I'll say to someone, if I was going to use the miracle question, I'm going to say something really strange. I want you to imagine that you go to bed tonight and while you're asleep, a miracle happens. And the miracle is that this issue that has been bothering you is no longer a problem to you. But you're asleep, so you don't know the miracle's happened. So what's the first sign in the morning that would tell you this issue is no longer a problem to you? I'm not now talking about the removal of the problem. I'm not talking about some perfect heavenly scene where things are exactly as you want it to be. I'm talking about you have changed. Your relationship to that problem or that issue has changed such that you get on with your life and everything else is the same except for you. You've changed your relationship to that problem. It's no longer an issue for you, or that issue is no longer a problem. And I find that quite an exciting way to ask the question. It gets our brains really flowing. It also focuses on what we need to focus on, which is us and how we live, rather than trying to create a life where there are no issues or problems whatsoever. Any questions at that point? Because I'm wondering if we can do a demonstration of a technique and we'll do it with everyone. Is that okay, Patrick?
Yeah, sounds perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so this is something that I call the BAT process, which stands for brief acceptance and transformation. And you'll know now that the transformation is, excuse me, the transformation is of you, not of, it's not the removal of the problem. The transformation is your relationship with the problem. So brief acceptance and transformation. So it'd help if you could each think of an issue. Let's just say, think of an issue that's causing you some frustration. It may be like procrastination. It may be a phobia or an anxiety. It may be a self-critical thought you can't get beyond. I describe this process as being like verbal voodoo. I don't mean literally the religion of voodoo, because I don't know enough about that. I just mean the stereotype of voodoo, you know, with the voodoo dolls and you stick a pin in it. You have a doll that represents someone, and I think I learned this in a James Bond film. You stick the pin in the doll that represents that person and they feel the pain. So we're gonna, in the same way, we're gonna come up with symbols or images or avatars or dolls to represent our thoughts and feelings. And in a moment, we're going to experiment with this and just see what happens. So I want you to know that through all of this, you're perfectly safe. We're going to begin by accessing some feelings around this issue, but this is temporary. This is the first step on the road to transforming the issue for us. So I want you to think about that issue that is causing you some difficulty. And as soon as you can access the troublesome feelings, you can stop thinking about it, but keep hold of the feelings just for a little bit longer. And as the thought fades away, you're left with just a physical feeling. It's only a feeling. I'm sure it's a feeling you're familiar with. If not, take some time to get to know it. For the purposes of transformation, you might even think of yourself as welcoming the feeling, so you can get a handle on it, so you know what you can be working on. Really get to know that feeling. And I can't help but wonder, what would it mean if you didn't have that feeling when you think about that? What would that have to mean? What would it mean to you if you didn't have that feeling? And as you sit with those feelings, without judging them or avoiding them, I wonder if you can notice where in your body you can feel them. And maybe you want to ask yourself at this point, are you sure that you want that feeling to change? And if you are you ready for that to begin happening now? Because the next step is that we're going to take that feeling and externalize it outside of your body. And the first part of doing that is to symbolize the feeling. You might have already done this without realizing it. As you spent time noticing it and locating it, it might have seemed to have a certain shape or to be a particular color. If you haven't got a symbol, just clear your mind and ask your subconscious mind for a symbol that represents that old feeling that you're working on. And a symbol can be anything. It could be a beach ball, it could be a puppy, it could be a pulsating blob of color. It might be a sound or a smell. Let your mind come up with whatever symbolizes that feeling. And the first thing that comes up is often the right one. And now take a moment to familiarize yourself with that symbol. This is your voodoo doll. Really get to know it. Some things you might want to consider, but they might not all be relevant, is it big or small? Is it solid or translucent? What color is that feeling, that symbol? Is it still or is it moving? Light or heavy? Hard or soft? Cold or hot or warm? And when you have a symbol that you feel accurately represents how that issue made you feel, we can now externalize it. And we're going to move your symbol outside of your body. You might imagine yourself taking hold of it and bringing it out in front of you. Or you may simply allow it to float out of your body until it's about 2 feet in front. And when it's there, notice that externalizing has changed it at all, its size or its shape. Because we're now going to begin to inspect this shape more closely. Turn the image around and upside down so you can observe it all. Bring it closer to you or further away if you want to get a better view of it. And now I want you to look at your symbol with compassion. This is, after all, an aspect of you. It's not all of you, but it has been an aspect of you. And the act of acknowledging all parts of you and your experience may well enable you to become more whole. We can learn how sometimes the most despised, hidden, dismissed places of us contain our greatest treasures. You might even, and this might sound strange, you might even ask questions that seem nonsensical, but it could serve you well. You may want to ask what the symbol needs. Is it lacking in some way? Missing something important? Does it have anything to teach you? You might not consciously be aware of an answer, but as your subconscious mind generated the symbol, you can trust your subconscious to pick up any lessons that it contains for you. And if you have an inkling of an answer to those questions, notice that that changes the feelings associated with the symbol. And begin now to play around with some of its features. Some people, I like to do is I imagine taking it in my hands and adjusting it like a lump of clay. If it's cold, make it warm. If it's heavy, make it light. Change the color, the shape, the texture. Make it bigger or smaller. And as you do this, notice any changes in the feeling that the symbol contains. Do you prefer the new feelings brought about by modifying the symbol, or would you now rather keep the original feeling? Maybe just a bit of it. Continue to make changes to the shape, noticing what effect it has on your feelings. What happens if you send the symbol out into the distance, or how does it feel when you bring it closer? And when you've played around enough and discovered some beneficial changes you could make, it's now time to pass the steering wheel back to your subconscious. If you no longer want to feel the way that your original symbol represented, consider what you want to feel instead. As we said, you don't necessarily just need to say, I don't want to feel anxious. Think about what you do want to feel. Calm, confident, at peace. And now invite your subconscious mind to continue to make any changes to the symbol until it captures what you want to feel instead of the old feeling. This may happen instantly or gradually. Keep noticing the changes until you feel that your new shape represents your new desired feelings. And let your mind just work on this in its own time. There's no rush, or it may take you straight there. And this is where we utilize any lessons learned or perspectives gained. You're going to take the symbol and put it back inside you in its original place. The one thing I will say, if you notice taking a symbol away from you made it smaller because of perspective, you can imagine that when you bring it closer, it stays small, or it may even keep its blurred nature, whatever it took on when you moved it out. But most people find that they can just take this new shape as it is, that the subconscious has chosen for them, and place that symbol back inside. Wiggle it around a bit until it's a nice, secure fit. And then notice how that pleasant symbol feels inside you. Is it the right fit for you? Is this a change you want to adopt? Can you accept this new feeling? Welcome it just as you welcomed the older feeling. And now take that new feeling that this symbol represents and feel it within you, growing, spreading throughout your entire being. Some people do this by imagining the shape expanding to fill them. Others imagine the shape growing and spreading like a bright light throughout their body. Simply go with whatever your subconscious mind comes up with and accept it and let it spread. And now I'm going to ask you to do something that all NLPers do. I'm going to ask you to break state. So open your eyes, think about your favorite pastry, sing a line from nursery rhyme, whatever it is that you guys do. And when you've changed your focus of attention, I'm going to ask you to think again about the issue or the incident that was troubling you. And if it gives you butterflies or you're a bit nervous, that's fine. It's just your brain getting used to this new way of thinking. Think about the issue that was causing you some difficulty. How do you feel when you think about that now? And my hunch is that the feeling's changed, or you've changed somehow in your relationship to that experience and that issue. You may feel differently about the incident. And if you do, you might want to take a second to notice if you think differently about that incident as you feel differently about it now. And the root of all of that transformation of your attachment to that issue and that feeling was simply learning to accept it and embody it, investigate it, change it where necessary, and then utilize it. Yeah, so that's the brief acceptance and transformation process. Welcome any feedback on that?
Could I ask a question, perhaps?
Yeah, go for it.
Would it be possible to work with this with pain relief as well? So this is something that, I mean, many people who experience pain, it's very localized in the body perhaps, and maybe it's a chronic state as well, so it's chronic pain. And since this is just using your imagination in order to work with it, how would you adjust this? I thought it was a beautiful, not only technique, but well done on your part too. I liked it very much. So how would it work with something purely physical, not just a sort of a ghost in your mind or something like that?
I mean, I do use it with pain.
Yeah.
The first thing I would say is that there's not much pain that is purely physical. There's always
true
to it. So Yeah, and again, this is why it's helpful. It's a brief acceptance. We're not saying to someone you need to live with that pain for the rest of your life. We wouldn't say that at all, because we're not, I don't think many of us medical practitioners, but we're saying to them, just for now, if you can accept this and stop fighting against it, notice what it really feels like, because, you know, we amplify these things. And you'll notice, partly through my delivery and partly through how the process is staged, there's an element of something like relaxation in there. So having less tension around the pain. Yeah, the one thing I haven't found great success with it is with toothache and dental pain. But much other pain, particularly if it's, you know, not chronic, this works quite well with it. Just in the same way that there's some real advances nowadays in psychological treatment of pain, recognizing the anxiety basis, the fear, and yeah, the resistance, I guess. I mean, my suggestion would be to try it out and let me know.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or observations on that process? Okay, I'll just check if there's any other stories of Ericsson that I want to share. Yes, I'll finish with this one if that's okay. Do you guys know the story of the African Violet Queen? So this Ericsson treated in the 1950s a patient who'd been referred to him, and he had treated her nephew, I think. She was wealthy, unmarried, no children, living alone in a massive house that she'd inherited. And sorry, is someone saying something? Sorry, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's it. Great. Hi.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. I was actually doing on the pain right now, and it was fantastic, I could say. It was changing in this. Yes. I have a pain the whole time, and that was in my mind, and it changed from very pain and I don't know what it's called in English, when you have a rose and that's pain on the rose.
Yeah, prickly, pointing needles.
Yeah, and it changed to a very soft mushroom, you can say. Wow. With round like a cloud instead. And when you say what this was feeling after, it was very, very warm in my chest and lovely feeling.
Wonderful. I'm so happy. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks. It was amazing. So brilliant. Thanks.
I think often what's happened with that is it goes back to the hope thing that Patrick was asking about earlier. Especially if we've got pain that we're living with all the time, just temporarily contemplating the idea that you may have some relief from it or you might change it slightly, just lets our mind and body do wonders, I think. Thank you for sharing that.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'll finish. If there's any other observations or questions, just jump in. Telling about the African Violet Queen, who lived alone, was depressed, an elderly lady in a massive house, and illness had now confined her to a wheelchair, and she slipped into depression. So her nephew asked Ericsson to go and visit her because Ericsson had treated him. And Ericsson made his way around the house, and he turned up, I think it was on a walking stick at the time, using a walking stick back in the 1950s. So immediately they had some connection because they would have both been outsiders in their community. So she shows Ericsson around the house, and it's massive, room after room after room, all the curtains closed, it's all gloomy, until she gets to the greenhouse, where she's been growing these large African violets from cuttings. I'm not horticulturally inclined, but apparently that's quite a difficult thing to do. And Ericsson commented on it because he grew up on a farm, so he knew about these sort of things. And he complimented her, and he noticed that as she talked about the flowers, her expression brightened slightly. She seemed to come alive a little bit, and sharing her process and her skill, you saw a little bit of something like passion. And in that instance, Ericsson said to her, "I don't think you're depressed." She said, "No," sensing some hope. And he said, "No, I think what it is you're not a very good Christian," which in 1950s America would have been an awful thing to say. But he went on to clarify that here you are in a massive house, financially capable, comfortable, plenty of free time on your hands, and all you do is lock yourself away. And so he said to her, "What I want you to do is keep growing African violets and get a list of all the members of your church. And every time there's a birth or a death or an important life event, I want you to get your driver to take a plant round to them and deliver it to the individual involved." Years later, when she died, a Milwaukee newspaper published the obituary and had the headline, "African Violet Queen of Milwaukee dies, mourned by thousands." And the paper went on to record that they couldn't fit enough people in the church that wanted to attend the memorial because she'd touched so many people in the last years of her life. And Ericsson was asked about this story by Bill O'Hanlon 20 years later. And O'Hanlon at the time was training to be a psychiatrist. And he was getting frustrated with a medical model and over-reliance on medication. And he said to Ericsson he wants to learn the African violet way of working. And Ericsson said to him, this is a quote again, "I simply looked around her life and everything looked depressing. She lived in a big house all alone. She kept the curtains drawn because she was embarrassed about being in a wheelchair. It was dark, it was lonely. The only sign of life I could see in her and her life was those African violets. And I thought it'd be easier to grow the African violets part of her life than to weed out the depression." Yeah, again, a focus on life, a focus on action and activity, not just how she was feeling, but utilizing her situation, her skills, her passions to make genuine change in her life and in the wider community. And yeah, I find that really inspiring and exciting. That's me. That's all I've got to say. Any questions or feedback on any of that, feel free to let me know, or you can email me or contact me through Patrick, or just grab me when I'm in Stockholm in November.
Yeah, thank you so much, Graham. This was very interesting, and I loved the group process. I had a very weird black obelix, which got transformed to like a sea of whitish light people jumping something.
Wow.
Very strange. Thank you. Anyone else has anything else they would like to ask Graham? So now's your chance.
Just want to say thank you. Great work, Graham. Looking forward to meet you in November.
You too. Thank you for feedback. Pleasure.
Yeah. So the first weekend in November, we will host Graham in somewhere in central Stockholm, and everyone is very much welcome. And we will have 2 days of working with. Maybe do you want to say something else about the weekend? And maybe some of our members are coaches, therapists, but many are not. Can you say something about how useful this will be for people that just want to work with themselves?
Yeah, I think my plan is to structure it so that the first day is looking at acceptance and the impact of that on our lives. And that will be very much focused on us rather than doing it for other people. And then my second day is going to be using solution-focused tools to make change and move forward. So I'm kind of thinking of it as day 1 is acceptance and getting unstuck, and day 2 is solution focused and moving forward. And a lot of exercises, a lot of questions, and I hope lots of new perspectives. And again, talking about the power, I think this will be over the whole weekend, the power of hope and possibility thinking, and a little bit about getting out of our past, because I think so many times, you know, if you've got a phobia, often it's past related. If you've got attachment issues, if you've got resentment, guilt, shame, and we often try to deal with those things by dealing with our past. Whereas what Marita shows us and what solution focused therapy tells us is that sometimes we can leave the past in the past and still go on to make great progress and change. Yeah. So using acceptance on day 1 to get unstuck, and using solution focus tools on day 2 to move forward. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Sounds fantastic, and very useful and very needed in let's say challenging climate as we have now, with a sort of pandemic still something, and political views and everything that's going on in the world.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.